Well, I'm not worried about a mic picking me up. Hi, everybody. I'm Norman Garland, one of the 4 fellows. We wanted to, before we got started, get a sense of who you are in the audience. So, how many of you are professors? Okay. How many of you are here to find out how to create CALI lessons? Well, need I ask anything more?
Well, the other question is how many of you are interested in using CALI lessons in class as opposed to using them only as supplemental materials? In class.
In class. All right. Anything else that we should ask?
How many of you use CALI lessons now?
Oh, how many of you use CALI lessons now? Okay. If you knew that you could use the CALI software to create your own materials for use, to create a lessonette for use in your own classes and not necessarily for distribution, I take it that you would be interested in that as well. How many? Okay. Well, we've just spent the last year producing what we believe is a substantial number of lessonettes in the subject matter of criminal law, and we had varied experiences in producing these materials. So we thought we would start today by discussing what those experiences were. And there's a number of different topic headings that we have identified for discussion, and one of the things that we thought we'd start out talking about was how we figured out what materials to use for the development of a lesson. Now again, all the lessons that we're going to talk about are these lessonettes, which we produced in the subject matter of criminal law. And I guess I'd like to start out by saying that although lessonettes, and the term lessonette was coined this past year by CALI and trademarked, they were designed to be very short as compared with the traditional CALI lesson, which is much more substantial. When we started out, there was talk about the fact that a lessonette should take about 20 minutes to a half an hour at most to work by a student. And there was also some talk about how it might take as little as 45 minutes to produce a lessonette. Well, our experience during this past year was that the time to produce a 20 to 30 minute lessonette, even in a subject area that one may be very familiar with, is at least, from my experience, 50 hours or more. Still a substantial time input. Much of it centered around identifying the source materials, and for me, in figuring out what I want to deliver from those source materials, what type of question to create, what type of format within the CALI authoring program to utilize. And so I think we can start out by talking about the identification of materials. You want to start, Ellen?
Well, I think the first question when you're going to write a lessonette, first you have to look at the scope. I originally took on what was on the grid, and hopefully you're all familiar with the grids. CALI has posted to the website grids for most of the first-year areas, and they basically break down the courses into, essential subject areas, very broad, things that some person teaching, for example, criminal law, might teach. As we quickly found out, most of us don't teach many of the parts of the grid. But this stuff is on the grid, and when I first was doing my first lesson, it was supposed to be just one little piece of the grid on the Model Penal Code and states of mind under the Model Penal Code. By the time I got finished, it was 5 lessonettes, because the first thing you have to define is what am I teaching and what's the scope of what I'm teaching, and more importantly, not so much what I'm teaching through this lessonette, what is it that I want the students to learn from doing this lessonette? Do I want them to learn a skill? Do I want them to learn information? Do I want them to learn a combination? And then you're forced to ask questions about what do the students need to know ahead of time in order to be able to run this lessonette, and you can make those decisions and build that into what you should have done already. Okay. And then what's the format for making sure that these goals in terms of skill, because to me statutory interpretation in the model penal code is a skill, how do I teach the skill and the information at the same time? And one of the things you find is, I've been teaching this stuff for 20 years, but when you teach, you get into sort of your own little niches about what you cover and how you cover it. And when you start writing for a lesson that may be used by others other than yourself, you really have to break out of that. And so the amount of work beyond what I had from my own classes that I needed to do, even to get comfortable with covering the scope of a small amount of material, was way beyond what I expected. But it also was very good for me because it forced me to sort of go back to the basics, go deeper, and go beyond what I've been teaching myself in my own classes. And in some respects, it's going to change some of the things and the way I teach them actually in class.
Just a few thoughts. I'm Rosanna Cavallaro, also working on this project. I started out with some of the same questions, sort of preliminarily, how am I going to approach this, what am I going to consult, and I ended up trying to write the lessons as sort of a recap of what I would do in class to teach the material, which we had talked about doing as a group. So what do I do when I'm up and there's a board, and what kinds of emphases do I want to make, and what kinds of hypo-ringing of the changes do I want to do with a student, and how can I try to do that using the CALI lesson format. So I never thought of it as being something that was going to be comprehensive with pop-ups to law review articles and treatises. I just thought of it as being pretty streamlined, much more of an exercise to take the student through a pretty confined subject matter like the mens rea of knowledge. Just that. If you teach criminal law, you know how discrete that is. Thinking about the idea that it might ultimately tie into other lessons about other mens rea levels or actus reus or defenses, but just a discrete sort of island. Just do this one thing. And that simplified for me the task. I wasn't trying to be global the way you would be in other scholarship. Oh, I need a footnote to that, and I need to make a reference to that, and I need to allude to the distinction that some people have observed. You know, I couldn't do everything, and I thought that was very liberating to me to not want to try to do that. It was very different from the other kinds of writing that I had been trying to do. And then just in terms of, do you want to talk about question format? Yeah, do you want to move on? We'll move on later. Okay.
I chose from the grid, which I displayed for you a moment ago. We had 2 or 3 sessions where we hashed out what subjects to cover from the grid, what subtopics. I volunteered to do justification defenses. And quite frankly, having taught basic criminal law for a few years, and I haven't taught it for another couple of years, my experience in teaching the basic course was that we never got to defenses. I never got to defenses except as part of the study of homicide. So I was taking a grid set of topics that I had not taught in its entirety, in some cases ever, and in other cases not for many years. But I had the experience the previous year of writing a CALI lesson in evidence, in which I approached the lesson by being very confined. It was a shorter lesson, not quite a lessonette, but a bit shorter. And I decided in creating that lesson to define the universe from a starting point of, if you're familiar with the law, the evidence materials, the advisory committee's notes to a series of particular rules of evidence. That worked very well for me, so when I started the defense lessonettes, the justification defense lessonettes, I decided to identify a limited source universe. And I chose the treatise of Lefebvre and Scott, Dressler's Understanding Criminal Law, and something I had never known existed, an Encyclopedia of Criminal Justice, which is a 4-volume work edited by Kadish. It's about to be redone by Joshua Dressler as the editor, and the Model Penal Code, particularly the Model Penal Code comments. So I started out with any particular lessonette I was devising by scrutinizing these resources, summarizing them for myself, and selecting the topical issues, either structurally very fundamental or cutting edge, and then organizing and reorganizing them as the starting point for any given lessonette. And so if you look at my lessonettes, you'll see that they are geared towards that, with many references scattered throughout them to these materials. But that's how I started out doing it.
I'm Markus Dubber, and I'm also one of the fabulous 4 fellows. Listening to Norm, I now understand why it took you 50 hours to do this. It shows that there's an enormous variety of approaches that you can take to this task. I tried to pick topics that I thought I knew pretty well, and tried not to think too much about, I probably should have done more of this, but which sources to use and how to combine them and select among them. I just kind of started writing and pretended to be teaching the subject to my students, and then magically lessons appeared on the screen, and this is a great feature that I want to recommend to anyone who wants to spend time writing these lessons, that the program that CALI has developed for this is really excellent, and through many different editions now has really become a very nice, easy to use tool that allows you to approach the subject or your task from many different angles, whether you take Norm's approach or you're a little more reckless, if I can use a technical term for criminal law, and then just start typing and just see what comes out. And then you can always mess around with it and fix it and chop off some things and turn it into 5 lessonettes or 5 into 1. And it's really a nice tool that I can recommend to anyone, even if you've never used anything like it or are unfamiliar with computers. Well, I assume you all are very familiar with computers. And it just allows you to express yourself very easily, and if you need to quickly, you can always fine-tune it later. I think this probably wasn't the subject I was supposed to talk about, so I'm sorry. But I want to make sure that also we at the end, and not too close toward the end, we give the audience a chance to ask questions. Because my guess is that there's really quite a variety of people. Some may be interested in criminal law, so they may be interested in model penal code and that kind of stuff. Others may have no interest in criminal law, maybe property people or just computer people. I think we may be able to help you figure out some stuff if you ask questions at least later.
Well, actually, I think because of the nature of this, that it might be a good idea, since we're talking about areas and subjects in terms of the development of these things that are familiar to us and may be totally unfamiliar to you in the audience. If there's anyone who has a question about anything we've said so far, I think this would be a good time to ask. You may not know anything about what we're referring to, for example, the authoring software or so on.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions?
So we could do interactive, we could be...
Yeah, we're author interactive.
Yeah, we could be
questions
your
at any
CALI
time.
author, please.
Here's one here.
Oh.
Actually, I think a question about the authoring program can be more detailed about it.
Sure.
Well, maybe we should just do more of a demo, because maybe we could do it in the context of question types. I think that's sort of the next logical place to be. One of the things that we struggled with, pardon me, jumping in here, is thinking about what kind of question is the best way to deliver a certain piece of what you want to deliver. Maybe that's not the right word, but how best to have the student interact in the material, and trying to avoid the repetitiveness of always using a multiple choice A through D, which one is the best answer. And the software actually provides a really nice array of question choices, and then the responsibility falls upon you, the author, to see which one fits. So it took me, for example, several weeks to figure out that sometimes I really thought there was more than one good answer, and so the multiple choice A, B, C, D was not the best one for me to use, because I kept giving these weird feedback screens for answers that were pretty good but not great. And so I tried to rethink, what kinds of options there were, and maybe we should show what they are. Do you want to do that with more depth than I?
Could I step back for one moment and more fundamentally? CALI Author is the current software package available from CALI that provides a Windows-based environment authoring program, which is so simple to use that anyone who knows how to use Windows can use it.
That I can use it.
Any of us can. It allows the faculty member or developer to, just from square one, enter into the program, select a variety of question types and page types to present a fully interactive lesson at the end. And it really is developed to a point, thanks largely to some guinea pigs, namely us, that it works quite well now.
Oh, it just so happened, Norm, that while you were talking, the battered women syndrome lesson appeared on the screen.
Okay.
Is it okay?
Sure, of course.
This is the web version. The CD version is a little more colorful, I think, but it's the same idea, right? So, is that okay?
Sure.
You might also want to go into a new lesson just to see.
Oh, okay.
But I mean, want to do that?
Yeah. This is the finished product of that authoring program, which has this look and feel, no thanks to any of us, but to the developers of the program itself.
It gives you a sort of a prefab template of bullet points you fill in and can extend or expand, and you can do subheadings. And then within those bullet points, you can decide to have an informational screen, which would be roughly called a book page, or to have a screen that would instead be more of a question format, although you can have questions in the book page.
So it starts out with an introductory page, which is not a question or a question type, and then moves into whatever you want to go to, including specific question types.
Whoa.
When I began this, it occurred to me that it needed an introduction in a series of questions to refresh the user's recollection of what self-defense fundamentally was. So I experimented, and actually this was an experiment with a question type that is quite difficult. It poses the greatest challenge for the user to pick a word or a term that provides the answer. And virtually everyone who has tried to do this has complained about it, that they feel cheated because they chose the wrong word form. If you click answer,
gee whiz.
You should try this. So put in
no answer? Or
answer.
phrase?
Yeah.
Good.
Gee whiz. It's
Great
great.
first.
Okay.
So you say continue if you get to the list.
And then go to answer. See, these are all of the word choices that should work for that answer.
Yes.
And as I say, this is a very difficult question type.
Well, then you have to think about what situation you would want a student to be in where they were trying to supply language, sort of out of whole cloth, which is a very particular kind of thing you'd want to elicit. So that doesn't work.
Type in death.
Good.
Okay, that gave the right answer. this is, you can just scroll through till we get to the next question form. Okay.
Wow, look at that.
Graphics.
Oh, look at
Very
that.
excited.
Now this is the introduction to the next question, which is itself not a question. It's just the scenario. And there are two things perhaps we could talk about here, which is the selection, or three things. How do you decide how to create a scenario and what to choose and so on? Secondly, what question types do you choose? And thirdly, the use of graphics. So, I don't know, maybe somebody else, you want me to go on? Or?
Sure, why don't you work on this out?
My experience with this was I decided that there were three basic battered person syndrome scenarios that virtually all the commentators agreed upon posed a variety of alternative solutions under current law. And so I structured this lesson to cover those three scenarios. Then the next question for me was, well, what kind of question form will I use? So I started out by describing the scenario, and that's what this is. I sent it off for review by Ellen. She looked at it and said, I don't understand who's doing what to whom here. Maybe you should use a graphic. Then we were given instruction by the CALI administrators that we could use no graphics that posed any copyright problems. In other words, we had to create our own. So I drew this little cartoon, thinking that it was stupid and somebody else would provide some other graphics later, but this is what they ended up with. Although they did type in the words and the balloons. I had originally written them in by hand. But otherwise, this is my original graphic. Then, go on to the next page. So then the choices. I'm sorry, go back one. In order to write the scenario, I found this the most interesting experience. I would just say to myself, well, what would work here? And then I'd start writing, and I found that this to me was like the fulfillment of a fantasy. I'm becoming a creative writer. And this happened with every single question that I devised. It was very, I can never remember if it's left brain or right brain. The brain that, the part of the brain that creates rather than is
more analytical.
Yeah, analytical. And so my scenarios would kind of grow like Topsy, to mix a metaphor.
If I could just interrupt and say, I didn't have this cathartic experience that Norm had, but I just, in trying to write a lesson and drawing on the things that you would usually say in class to deliver that same idea, you probably have a few of these scenarios already in your arsenal, and then the question is which of them is nicely suited to a graphic, which of them is clear enough in the text, or should you use some kind of clever naming so that you're giving the student clear signals of, plaintiff, defendant, or, whatever the particular screen is trying to draw out. So just to take the pressure off in case you feel like you might not rise to that creative challenge. You probably have some stuff already that would fit really very nicely with what you do when you stand up to teach that material anyway.
Well, and in addition to that, when I did a lesson on concurrence between actus reus and mens rea, and there the factual problems are the core of what the courts talk about. And so I just went back and did some computer searches to find all these old, interesting cases, and was led to some of them by some of the Horn books and stuff, and used mostly scenarios based on actual cases, and that worked very well because you knew you were playing with the right kind of facts that were going to adequately raise the issues.
And one other thought, if I may. Thinking again about what role is this lessonette going to have in your course, if you're going to put in your lessonette exactly what you do in class, then you're sort of, well, what's the point? This is so the students can cut your class and get it from the lessonette. That's not exactly the perfect model, but if you want to reinforce some of the ideas that you developed in class and have the student really forced to give the response, whereas 90% of the students students are passively taking notes when you're doing it in class, then there's something to be said for having the scenarios overlap with things that you're doing live in class. So again, you have to think about, partly what you have to think about is how this is going to complement or substitute for what you're doing with the students in class. And if you look at this, in criminal law, for example, a lot of people recommend or use Understanding Criminal Law, Joshua Dressler's book, and it has fact patterns in it that are, you leave your coat on the coat rack, mistake of fact. Everybody knows that hypo. So it doesn't hurt to have that be one of the hypos in the lessonette as a way of getting the student up to speed, and then from there, posing nuances.
Okay, so however one identifies the hypothetical, that's just the beginning, because then you've got to figure out what is the discrete point that I am delivering here, and what's the best question form to do so. With battered woman syndrome, there were a number of competing, I was going to say doctrinal points, but it's more than doctrinal. Some were doctrinal, and some were state of the law, and some were other matters. And I somehow had identified from my preparation of the materials in this what those were. The first was what led to this form of question, which is a drag and drop classification, which is a very useful question form if you can ever figure out where to use it. And this was one area where there are competing evidentiary and doctrinal issues that are more of a problem or less of a problem, or a problem or no problem at all, depending on the basic fact scenario presented in battered person syndrome self-defense. And I realized that I could do this more than once in more than one scenario. So this first scenario is one where traditional self-defense principles would probably allow the defendant to testify about battered woman syndrome, battered person syndrome, the use of experts, and the giving of an instruction based upon the claim of battered person syndrome. And so the answer to this is drag and drop to there being no problem for all of these elements. And so the user, the student, would be asked to classify into either a problem or no problem. All of these should go into the second column for a right answer. And then there's, I believe, if you do it...
some of them could go in the left column
right.
for a right answer.
Yeah. But that's just the way this works. But this is a really good question form for that type of thing. And it doesn't always have to lead to everything in the same column, of course. And there's a variety or a number of other columns that can be used for choices, not just one or two.
Then you can set it up across. Just to clarify that this isn't limited to this particular use of it. This is an example of what I was saying earlier. If there's more than one right answer to a question, you might say, which of these is blah, which of these is adverse possession or something, and then you can have yes and no, and you can have a series of hypos, some of which get dragged into yes and some into no. And that's a format that works a lot better than forcing everything into a one right answer, all the others are wrong, in terms of the kind of feedback that you want to give. Because the reason why something is in one column versus another is what you're going to be giving the student when they get it right or get it wrong through feedback. So they put it in the wrong column, and when they get their results, they'll get a response that highlights a particular nuance that you wouldn't be able to get with just a straight-off multiple-choice question. So if I say, which of these phrases seems to you to be subjective in its emphasis rather than objective, and then you can try to, in your response, highlight why that it's not a good idea to put that phrase under subjective, as opposed to which of these phrases is a subjective phrase, and now I can only give you one that's subjective.
Now, and one thing is that if a student gets it wrong, you can then give a hint that would prompt them, and they can go back and try and move some around again, and you can give another hint, so that there are options for the students, and you can decide how many times you want to give them some additional assistance. The one downside, I think, of this kind of question is you can't give individual feedback on the one thing they might have had wrong. And so you have to give hints that are general to why students generally would get these wrong, rather than being able to give very specific feedback when a student puts something in the wrong place, which you're able to do in the multiple choice and some other format. So that's, to me, a big issue in question selection is what's the nature of the feedback I need to give the student, and does this kind of question format allow me to give that kind of feedback?
Yeah. Now, one of the things, click on scenario 1 in the top line. This program allows for hyperlink pop-ups of all sorts of material. This is just a reiteration of the basic problem or scenario that this question relates to. And then this next question type is just a basic choose the right answer. And what I'm leading to here is what I thought was one of the unique features of this lesson. I believe the next question, is for the student to draft a jury instruction that addresses the issues related to this first scenario in terms of self-defense. This particular subject matter is one that is very jury decision based, even though there's some legal principles that are necessary to get the case to the jury. And so I wanted each of these scenarios to have the students focus on what would be a good jury instruction. So this is an essay question format. And essay question in CALI Author is usually one of the more difficult or least desirable question forms that I found to use. But this was one area that I thought was very effective, which is to ask the student to look at a basic jury instruction, then to draft their own version of a more sophisticated instruction, and then give as feedback 1 or 2 examples of other instructions that had been approved by the courts. So this lessonette was very heavily oriented to reference to some decisions, which many lessonettes that we all did were not. But this was an area of the law where it was particularly usable for that purpose. Are you trying to get CALI Author up?
Yeah, that might be.
Yeah.
Okay. Good idea.
Yeah, that would be.
Then we can use a blank.
And then we could do it 3.
Do we need to save anything in progress? No.
In terms of how you would interact on the graphics, again, to sort of take away some of the anxiety, it's all fed to you. There's a menu when you create a screen. You want to do the name of the page, then you want to name what kind of a page it is. Is it a question page or a book page? And then there are also menu items for graphics. If you want graphics, you click on graphics, and then you can plop in an image that you consistent with applicable copyright law, obtained, or had someone more creative than you draw for you or something. Or you could take a photo with a digital camera and throw that in. So it's all very easy to put in. You don't have to be very sophisticated, and it invites you to include those things with the structure of the lesson.
And while Rosanna was just talking, he loaded the CALI Author program from the CD that you got with your materials onto this computer. That's how quick and simple it is.
So now we can do it on a new book, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, this is the creation. Why don't you talk, Markus?
Oh, this is what you look at when you start doing a lesson, and you can fill it in, with all your personal information. Absolutely key. This part is. And then it has these very helpful tips of the day. Like there's only one, but I think I don't know. I've never read it, but you don't have to because it's so easy. Instead of just going through how to write a lesson, which would be excruciatingly boring, this is what it looks like. This is what you're given, and then it's very simple to start changing things. This is the default, and there's a nice, convenient F3 key which lets you go into the mess around mode, and you'll see.
Otherwise known as the author mode.
Yeah, the author mode, right. And then boy, this is not that interesting.
What do you think about putting up on your page and just showing the different question types? By creating a new page that's a question page.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's do that. Well, I don't know. Let's try that. Yeah, that's a good idea. All right, let's do that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Let's do that. Save book. No. See, that was a very quick lesson. See, that was my first lesson. And now where are they? If I may ask. I'm sorry.
See, and this is exactly what happens. We call Deb when we can't do something, and she is very.
Usually she's right there, right next to us.
Right. I just thought it would be useful for you to see the array of question types in terms of thinking about which ones are most apt. And the other thing that we learned in the course of this and in reading each other's lessons is we have a tendency to give very little feedback for the right answer and long, excruciating feedback for the wrong answer, but we decided that was not a great idea because students stumble on the right answer and they end up with no feedback. So we thought of trying to be more even-handed and giving virtually the same amount of feedback even for a right answer. Good, you realize that. And then some explanatory text because sometimes in a multiple choice they just hit on it for the wrong reason.
Developing rules from how much that. I noticed on your scenario that the student had to actually scroll down and read the whole scenario.
I think we don't all agree on that.
What's the range of opinion?
I'm in the one screen mode. I don't like the scrolling down through text because it's so easy to get to another screen, and I think in terms of the psychology of doing one, it's satisfying for the student to feel like they're moving.
Well, I have to tell you that whether it's visible on the screen or not is a function of the presentation that I had no control over. That first scenario only was on one screen with no scrolling when I did it. The graphic that was put in here ultimately was made at such a size that it made it necessary to scroll. So that's something you have to work with, and it changes depending on the browser you're looking at and the environment that ultimately is up there.
Well, but even more so, there are some issues, I think. I tend to like the one screen. I don't like to have the students to have to go down further. But then one of the reviewers of one of my lessons suggested that it was necessary to have the statute that they're interpreting right there. I had it in a pop-up box. But this person doing the lesson felt like he needed to see it right there in order to be able to look at the facts and look at the statute at the same time. So those are issues I've played around with. And if it gets much beyond the screen, I will then put it in a pop-up because I think it's hard not to be able to see all the answers, especially when you're doing a multiple choice question and have a lot of scrolling to do. Is it not working?
No, it's... okay, great. No, it's working totally fine. Here's what the delay is. The people who were supposed to set this up before us, the people, neglected to set this stuff up. So it usually is not as clicky, and you usually don't have me appear in your office standing sideways in your desk. Although I'm always happy to chat with you. Now close your eyes, it's going to happen. There you go.
Oh, there it is.
All right.
Wow, cool.
And now you see, I downloaded this off the internet because as soon as you saw the author-student mode go back and forth, a lot of faculty are worried that students can get the answer or worse, change the answer. And so there is a password put on, which you'll all avert your eyes as I mysteriously type in.
It's asterisk, asterisk, asterisk.
So I don't know if you want to do something with your lesson in terms of question types, so that I can show my hot link graphic.
Okay.
You want some?
Only have we been through all the question types? Maybe we should ask now if there are other questions now that we've given you a little more on question types. Yes, Michael.
I have a question. I'm Rosanna Cavallaro, and just judging from the amount of time I've heard Rosanna speaking about this, it seems like it takes a fair amount of time to put together a lesson. So the question is,
go ahead and say it.
Why would I want to create my own lessons instead of just using the ones off the CALI disc?
Well, I have to tell you honestly, I signed up to do this fellowship, and that was obviously a question that loomed large because it's a whole year of, what I've been doing. And I thought that it was a nice opportunity for me to go into sort of a pedagogy mode as opposed to the other stuff that I'd been doing generally in terms of my writing, and think about how ideas are best delivered and it also was a kick in the pants for me to become more comfortable with this kind of a teaching environment. And I have actually really enjoyed the sort of discipline of thinking about, okay, I want to get this student to a level of comfort with the concept of this array of mens rea levels, which is, as it happens in the criminal law course, is something is like a black hole. You could spend 6 weeks on it if the students had their way, and they're always trying to get other sources for that. So trying to think about how to present that so that at the end of a 30-minute encounter they were a little bit better at it, I find to be a rewarding exercise for me as a teacher, and it's more focusing on the teaching than on most of what we do in terms of our own personal scholarship. Now, this may not agree, but the idea of thinking about what I do in the classroom and how to make it a digestible, interactive experience. My sense, I'd come to CALI from having used it in the evidence area, and the exercises, the lessons in that area, I thought were very, very good, and I was sort of challenged to try to do that. That level of teaching with the materials that I was very familiar with. And that's been worthwhile for that. In terms of, I think it will enhance the way I teach this fall, which I'm going to do for the first time using these lessons that we worked on this year.
Yeah, and aside from, being a fellow, which I really think enhanced my thinking about and teaching criminal law, which as I've been doing for 20 years, I will be doing some lessons that are going to be discrete to my own class that I will eventually give CALI, but are really not for the purpose of the fellowship or CALI, because, for example, criminal law is heavily statutory, and so you really need to give the students some introduction to some basic statutory analysis, concepts of statutory analysis in a criminal law context. And I spend some class time now, a fair amount of class time doing that. My hope is that by writing this sort of a couple of lessonettes on more the statutory interpretation in a criminal context, I can have the students go through that and really reduce the class time I spend on background concepts so that I can better spend the class time that I have getting more hands-on into the things I really want to do. So I think that there are a lot of things you could do with authoring in CALI that are not only necessarily for CALI but specific to your own classes that can make the teaching better, ultimately.
The lessonette format is also partly to invite people who are coming to a lesson that's been written by someone else to tinker with it and say, I don't really agree with Norm's formulation of what would be a good jury instruction. I think a better answer would be to put this in this column and this in that column. And you can go in, use your asterisk password, and do that. People are always having these spitting contests about nuances of how they teach the definition of attempt or something. And I think the structure of this and the small, discrete approach to lessonettes is to invite people to tinker with them and fine-tune them to the way that they teach, so that you might not necessarily want to author an entire lessonette, but you might want to know how to use the authoring software around the edges to put in hypos that you use in your class, or if you teach ethics but you use a criminal focus and the lesson uses a civil focus, that you can kind of substitute out but basically use the shell of that lesson.
And one other thing that I think is important is, I think we're all familiar with lots of students who disengage from the experience for a variety of reasons. And I used two of the lessonettes that I had done in my criminal law class when I introduced some of the model penal code concepts and the manipulation of statutes, not something that is inherently interesting to students. And I got really good feedback from the students because it was different and it was somewhat novel. Now, if we're all doing it all the time, it's then not going to be novel anymore, but I think it gives students who learn differently a way to engage with the material that we don't have time necessarily to do in class. And it is different, and it actually, for the students, can be fun. And so the more we get them interacting with the material, and also, as you see, there's lots of opportunities for hyperlinks. My guess is when my students are reading Dressler, and it uses a term like attendant circumstance that they don't know, they're not flipping to the back of the book to see where the definition of attendant circumstance could be found in Dressler. They're either going to make assumptions about that term or they're just going to ignore it. Whereas when it's so easy, when there's this little blue, just one click, will give you a box and give you what you need, I think the students are actually going to have a better learning experience using that material, and that's better for us.
Another question? Yes.
Might seem you would say that with the system that you have, if I wanted to modify for my purposes your, how is it possible for me to do that?
By
Download it.
First you download the Lessonette, then you launch CALI Author, which is loaded on your computer. You put in the password when you open that Lessonette that you want to alter, push F3 and you're in the author mode. And you can do anything to that Lessonette you want. Well, you'd have to get the password from CALI.
And then you would make it available to your students using however you make things available to students.
And I think the expectation would be to say this lesson as modified by whomever, but that was one of the perceived advantages of these lessonettes, is that anybody could use them in the ways they want to use them. So if you disagree with something that I said and it's not the way you teach it, when you use it, it's going to be the way you see it.
Then if there were 4 or 5 people who disagreed on something like that, is there a way to get at all 4 or 5 variations, subdivisions, or all the things?
Deb, you want to jump in on that?
Yes, in theory there is. What that requires is, I'm a keeper of this chapter because obviously it's very closely guarded. We all want the definition of attendant circumstances. Changing for a personal week and it's far too fast and long. So you get the password book from me, I help you do whatever you need to do to change the lesson. I then follow up with you weeks later and say, what did you do? Are you going to do some sharing or you did back with us? And then the question becomes, how does CALI start collecting all of these changed, modified lessons, keeping them discrete and separate from the original, but having them out there also the same. We hope people can share back what they're doing. We don't allow people to do things in the privacy of their own classroom. So it's not a requirement to share back. We certainly will be used for the very reason to say it becomes a collective consciousness.
But at the very least, I think it should be clear that we would like you to tinker with these things for your own use. Create your own lessonettes. And if all you want to do is take an existing lessonette and tinker with it for your own use and never share it, I think that's fine too.
But I think it would be helpful if you were going to look at one of our lessonettes and there's something in there that you have some questions about. I'd love for you to tell me, because maybe I would be forced to rethink it and change it on mine as well.
Official one.
Yeah.
I mean, we discussed and decided early on that we were not going to, as a group, agree on every word that we were delivering in terms of the doctrinal accuracy, because it's just not possible. So we've all sort of gone off and labored on our own and had a reviewing process. But obviously we recognize that there's going to be an array of views about, what is retribution or something. Markus just clicked on retribution to try to reveal me as someone who really didn't understand truly.
But look, no, Rosanna, hot off the press, right? You rushed this in on a floppy disk from Boston. This is the cutting edge of CALI authoring.
It's my own graphics, but imagine
look at this, not just the graphic. Look, it's not just the graphic.
It allows me to click on a graphic for the feedback rather than on written words. It's just for variety.
Look at that.
So it says which frame or whatever. And so, I mean, not that this is a wonderful question per se, but that the style of it invites you to be pretty creative. You could even have a single panel image and say, click on the area of the image where, is the biggest concern in terms of liability or something, and you can hot link that piece of that graphic to a particular feedback, and, you get the idea. This is another question type, as you can see, of matching. The other thing that we try, yes, please. I think they're on the new version of the CD.
They're on the CD that you got with your materials, and they're on the web.
Not this one, but this one's almost done. I can finish it.
Access this on the web primarily.
Right.
On whose website, CALI?
CALI.
And they're also linked through.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, please, you're the microphone.
They're also linked through Twen and
CALI URL builder. When you go to the CALI website, you create your very own URL. You can put into your own web page. So if you have a class syllabus and you want them to run Rosanna's lesson this particular week, you could have a hot link right from your very own personal website, right directly into the CALI lesson.
And can you do that from the Twen as well?
Yes.
If you put your syllabus on Twen,
Yeah.
it'll link right into this.
No, you're just...
Yes, you can do it that way, and also on Twen, when you set up your Twen page, you can select the CALI lessons that are linked to that class on Twen, and it's automatically put in there. You can either have it automatically put in, or you can select it yourself by choosing the specific lessons.
One other thing that we didn't get to, and we got to it relatively late in the fellowship, is the sort of diagnostic use of CALI too, that you can have the question, you can have the lesson branch, so that people that are getting it right away can skip over a set of questions, or people, either you reward the quick or however you phrase it, but you can have multiple paths through a lesson. So if you say, well, okay, see if you understand the hierarchy of mens rea from least culpable to most culpable, and if you get that right, then you just go on. But if you don't get that right, then you might have a little side branch that reviews the sort of relationship among those different mental states until the student is comfortable with that hierarchy, and then plugs back into where the other folks went who did get it right. And that's, I think, another useful tool in terms of thinking about the teaching aspect of this, is how you capture students before they're so far into the semester that all hope is lost, and they're never going to really understand this core concept. And I think you can use these lessons, again, the ones that we have, if they don't have sufficient branches, that would be another opportunity for you to sort of tweak a lesson and say, well, wait a second, before we get to this idea, I really want the students to spend some more time working a few more hypos on this definition, so I know they really get it, and then they can go on to these sort of theoretical issues or whatever case may be.
And also practice questions at the end, and that's something that would be, I think would be really good for other people to work on developing. You all have your own hypos that you've used for many of the same things, and it's hard coming up with more and more and more practice or review questions, and the more that people do and put them in this format, the more that will be up there available for students who want to practice.
Another question?
Yeah, since there are these various ways of using these questions that you suggested, this branch thing came out later, do you have a teacher's manual of some kind?
I'm glad you asked that question. The question is whether there's a teacher's manual. There is a teacher's manual that is available in progress for each of the lessons from the criminal law grid. There is a manual of instruction on how to use CALI Author that is already completed, and it is available. We're kind of running out of time. I want to give a summary to you of what I think is important to understand about what CALI Author is. About 20 years ago, I was hoping to be able to use an artificial intelligence program, computer program, in order to deliver to evidence students the concepts of hearsay and relevance. At that time, there was such a program available at the University of British Columbia that cost something like $100,000 that they were using for a program up there. And I never did get a chance to work out a lesson doing that. CALI Author enables any of us to do what we used to dream about 20 years ago in terms of using the computer for interactive delivery of information to students. You can make of it whatever you want. This branching notion is nothing more than an interactive approach to delivering information to a variety of different students who may be at different levels. We've really only scratched the surface in being able to describe to you today what CALI Author can do. I urge you all to open it up and try and use it for any purpose that you could think of in terms of augmenting your work in the classroom and delivering to students either basic information separate review, separate examination, whatever you want to call it. It really does work, and the tool is there and ready and available for you to use.
Not only is there a manual on the website to using CALI Author that you can download, but there's a demo lesson that actually is a CALI lesson that takes you through the question formats and sort of shows you how they work and how you can use them. And every once in a while, when I get stuck in a question format and I seem to find that I'm using the same format over and over again, I go back and redo the demo lesson, and it sort of reinvigorates me to think about, well, maybe I should try this format or that format. So I strongly suggest, if you're going to start playing around with this, that you go through that demo lesson, which is on CD still, right? Yeah. And you can download from the web, and it really is very, very helpful if you're not really clear. I ran a bunch of other people's lessons, but that was even better to get me thinking about how my material could fit into a particular lesson type.
So one other cute thing that it does is, if you look along this column, it will tell you what kind of a page it is and what kind of question format it is. There's a little icon for each one. This is choosing the boxes, and this is whatever that is.
Can you do matching?
Yeah, the matching kind. So as you're working it, you can go in, or if you're browsing other people's lessons and you hit the SVP, you can see what kind of questions work and what kinds of ideas they can deliver, and sort of use adaptive techniques like that. Oh, this matching thing, I could do that for, the elements of my bankruptcy problem or whatever. And I think, all that stuff there, if you just kind of browse around. And we're available, too. I think our names are on all these things, with the idea that if you were out there thinking of tweaking it, you would call and talk about it, or thinking of writing something. Not to have the last word or anything. Nor. That's okay. Thank you.